The signal the stars had been silent for 12,000 years. And the Galactic Concord liked it that way. 347 species lived together in peace across the galaxy. And they had built their civilization on one simple rule. When someone calls for help, you answer with kindness, no weapons, no soldiers, no warships, just open hands and gentle words. This was the doctrine of peaceful first contact. And it had worked perfectly for longer than most species could remember. Earth was new to this grand family of stars. Humanity had only joined the Concord 40 years ago, and many of the older species still looked at them with worry in their eyes. Humans were strange creatures with a bloody history, but they had proven themselves peaceful enough to earn a seat at the great table, or so everyone believed. Admiral Kira Vasquez sat alone in her command room aboard the battleship Iron Resolve, reading a message that had traveled across 3,000 light years to reach her. The message was simple. Just a standard distress signal from a world called Valith Prime. The word said, "We require immediate assistance. Our resources are depleted, and our population is at risk." According to Concord Protocol, this kind of message meant one thing: send medical ships, send food supplies, send diplomats dressed in white robes who would smile and offer comfort. Vasquez had seen many such signals during her 30 years in the human space navy, but something about this one made her hands grow cold. She played the message again, listening carefully to every sound that came through the speakers. The Valith were a peaceful species, perhaps the most peaceful in all the galaxy. Their bodies were made of living crystal, beautiful structures that caught light and turned it into rainbows. They could not hurt anyone, even if they wanted to, because their biology simply did not allow for violence if a Valith tried to harm another creature. Their crystal bodies would crack and shatter from the stress. Why did this message feel so wrong? Vasquez called her communications officer, a young woman named Lieutenant Park, into the room. "Run this signal through our old Earth filters," Vasquez ordered. "Not the Concord standard filters. I want you to use the ones we designed during the resource wars." Park looked confused but did as she was told. The old Earth filters were military grade, designed to find hidden messages in enemy communications back when humans still fought each other. The Concord did not use such things because they saw no need for them. Minutes passed, and then Park's face went pale. "Admiral," she whispered, "there is a second signal buried under the first one." Vasquez felt her heart beat faster. "What does it say?" "It is in Old Valith, a language they stopped using 600 years ago," Park replied with a shaking voice. "But our translation systems can still read it." She looked up at her admiral with fear in her eyes. "It says one word: run." Vasquez stood up from her chair so fast that it fell over behind her. The Valith had not sent a call for help, they had sent a warning. Someone had forced them to broadcast that peaceful message. Someone who wanted ships to come. Someone who wanted visitors to arrive with no weapons and no defenses. And the Concord, in all its kindness, would send exactly that. Vasquez opened a channel to Earth Command. "This is Admiral Vasquez of the Third Fleet," she said. "I am declaring a Priority 1 emergency and requesting permission to mobilize all combat-ready vessels." The response came quickly, a confused voice asking what could possibly require such action. "The Valith distress signal is a trap," Vasquez explained. "Someone is using the doctrine against us. They are pretending to need help so that we send unarmed ships." Silence filled the channel for a long moment. Then, the voice of Fleet Admiral Morrison came through. Old and tired, but sharp as a blade. "Vasquez, the Concord will not like this." "I know, sir. They will call it an act of war." "I know that too." Morrison was quiet again, thinking about what this would mean for humanity's place among the stars. They had worked so hard to prove themselves peaceful, to show the galaxy that humans could be trusted. But Morrison was old enough to remember the wars on Earth. the battles that had shaped humanity into what it was today. He knew something that the peaceful species of the Concord had forgotten sometimes. The only answer to a trap is to spring it with overwhelming force. "You have my permission," Morrison said at last. "Take the Third Fleet and find out what is really happening on Valeth Prime." Vasquez nodded even though he could not see her. "Thank you, sir." She cut the channel and turned to face her bridge crew. 50 men and women looked back at her, waiting for orders. These were soldiers, trained for combat in a galaxy that had supposedly forgotten how to fight. They had spent their careers running peaceful missions and escort duties, protecting cargo ships and ferrying diplomats today. That would change. "All hands battle stations," Vasquez announced, a voice carrying through every speaker on the ship. "We are moving to Valeth Prime at maximum speed, and we are going in armed." The Iron Resolve came alive with activity as crew members ran to their positions around her. The other ships of the Third Fleet received the same orders and began to wake from their peaceful slumber. 12 battleships, 30 destroyers, 8 carriers filled with firecraft, and 200 support vessels. It was not the largest fleet in the galaxy, but it was the most dangerous because humans had never truly forgotten how to make war as the fleet prepared to jump into hyperspace. Vasquez looked out the window at the stars. Somewhere out there, the Valeth were suffering under an enemy that no one else could see. Somewhere out there, a trap waited for whoever was foolish enough to walk into it. The Concord would send diplomats, humanity would send warriors, and the galaxy was about to learn that sometimes answering a call for peace meant bringing the thunder of war. The Third Fleet vanished into hyperspace, leaving nothing behind but engine trails and a promise help was coming, but not the kind anyone expected. The Concord's outrage. The Great Hall of the Galactic Assembly was the largest room ever built by any species in known space. Its ceiling rose so high that clouds sometimes formed inside it, and its walls were covered with the flags of 347 worlds today. That hall was filled with anger. Ambassador Tethys of the Morvani Collective stood at the central platform, her forearms waving in fury as she spoke. Her species was ancient, having achieved peace before humanity had even learned to make fire. The Morvani had blue skin and gentle eyes, and they had not known violence for 10,000 years, but right now, Tethys looked ready to scream. "The humans have betrayed our trust," she shouted, her voice echoing through the massive chamber. "They have sent warships to answer a peaceful distress call." The assembly erupted into chaos. Hundreds of alien species began talking at once, their voices mixing into a storm of noise. Some shouted in languages that had no words for war. Others made sounds of disgust that needed no translation. "This is madness," cried a delegate from the Relix Consortium, a small creature covered in soft fur. "We voted to admit the humans into our family because they promised to follow our ways. They lied to us." Another voice called out, "We should have known better than to trust a species with their history." Earth's ambassador, a calm man named David Chun, sat quietly in his chair while the storm raged around him. He was 63 years old, with gray hair and deep lines on his face that spoke of many difficult years. He had spent his whole life trying to build bridges between humanity and the stars. Now, he watched as those bridges began to burn. Tethys pointed one of her forearms directly at him. "Ambassador Chun, you will explain yourself," she demanded. "Why has your species sent weapons to a world in need?" Chun did not stand up immediately. He took a slow breath and looked around the room at all the angry faces. Staring back at him, these were peaceful beings, creatures who had evolved beyond violence and could not understand why anyone would choose to fight. They saw the human fleet as an insult, a slap in the face of everything the Concord stood for, but they did not know what Chun knew. They could not see what he had seen. The humans will recall their fleet at once. Tethys continued when Chun did not speak. Or there will be consequences. Only then did Chun rise to his feet. He was not a tall man, and his voice was not loud. But something in his eyes made the room go silent. No, he said simply. The word hung in the air like a blade. No? Tethys repeated, her blue face turning darker with anger. You refuse to obey the doctrine? I refuse to send the Valith more victims, Chun replied. Confusion replaced some of the anger in the room. A delegate from the Shuvung Federation, a tall being made of living water, rippled with uncertainty. What do you mean, victims? It asked. The Valith sent a call for help. Not a call for soldiers. Chun shook his head slowly. The Valith did not send that message, he said. Their captors did. Silence fell over the assembly like a heavy blanket. 347 species stared at the human ambassador, trying to understand his words. Captors? Tethys whispered. What captors? Chun touched a control on his chair, and a holographic display appeared above the central platform. It showed a map of the outer regions of the galaxy. Areas that most species rarely visited. Red dots began to appear on the map, one after another, spreading like drops of blood across the stars. For the past 200 years, worlds have been going silent in the outer rim, Chun explained, his voice steady and cold. The Concord did not notice because these were small colonies, isolated outposts with little contact with the main trade routes. He pointed to the first red dot, the Viren mining station. Population 12,000. Went dark 193 years ago. Another dot lit up, the Shellback Hive colony. Population 800,000. Stopped sending messages 151 years ago. More dots appeared. Faster and faster. The garden world of Thessaly, the ice moon of Korath, the floating cities of Even Prime. The map was filling with red now. Dozens of worlds scattered across the darkness. All of them sent distress signals before they vanished, Chun continued. All of them asked for peaceful assistance. He looked directly at Tethys. All of them received. Diplomats and medical ships. The Morvani. Ambassador's forearms dropped to her sides. That is impossible, she said. But a voice had lost its certainty. We would have heard something. Someone would have reported back. No one reported back, Chun said. Because no one survived. He changed the display. And a new image appeared. A massive ship unlike anything the assembly had ever seen. It was black and covered in spines. And it seemed to swallow the light around it. We call them the Harvesters, Chun said. Our intelligence teams have been tracking them for 20 years. Ever since we joined the Concord and gained access to your historical records. He let the image hang in the air. They prey on peaceful species, using your own kindness against you. The delegate from the Urulix Consortium made a small sound of horror. But why? It asked. What do they want? Chun's face grew even harder. Resources, he answered. The Harvesters do not conquer worlds to rule them. They strip them bare and move on. He paused, letting the weight of his next words sink in. The Valith are not in crisis because of natural disaster. They are in crisis because they have been enslaved. The assembly hall had never been so quiet. Thousands of beings sat in stunned silence, their peaceful minds struggling to understand the horror that had been lurking at the edges of their perfect. Galaxy Tethys sat down heavily in her chair, her anger replaced by something that looked like fear. Why did you not tell us sooner? She asked weakly. Chun looked at her with eyes that held no blame. Only sadness. We tried, he said. 20 years ago, when we first discovered the pattern, we brought our evidence to this very assembly. He gestured to the empty chairs around him. You told us we were paranoid, that our violent history made us see enemies where none existed. Tethys looked away. Unable to meet his gaze, Chun gathered his things and prepared to leave. My people are going to Valith Prime to stop the Harvesters, he said. You can condemn us when we return. He walked toward the exit, then stopped and looked back one final time. Or you can start preparing your own defenses, because after we save the Velith, the harvesters will know they have been discovered. He paused at the door, and then they will come for all of us. The doors closed behind him, leaving the assembly in terrified silence. The truth of the Velith, Third Fleet emerged from hyperspace in perfect formation. And Admiral Vasquez felt her stomach turn at what she saw. Velith Prime had once been the most beautiful world in the galaxy. A planet covered in forests of living crystal that sang when the wind blew through them. Every child in the Concord had seen pictures of those forests, their rainbow colors spreading across the land like frozen music, but the forests were gone. Now the planet below was brown and gray, stripped bare of everything that had made it special. Where crystal trees had once stood tall, there were only empty craters and processing plants that belched black smoke into the dying sky. Mother of God, whispered Lieutenant Park from her station. What did they do to this place? Vasquez did not answer because she could not find words. She had seen terrible things during her long career, but nothing had prepared her for this. Massive orbital platforms hung in the sky above the ruined world, connected by tubes and cables that stretched for hundreds of miles through the magnified display. Vasquez could see movement on those platforms. Thousands of Velith, their crystal bodies cracked and dim, working in endless lines under the watch of armed guards. The guards were creatures she had never seen before. Tall and thin, with gray skin and too many joints in their limbs. They moved with a cruel efficiency that made Vasquez's blood run cold. Admiral called her tactical officer. Commander Hayes, I am detecting a massive energy signature at the center of the system. The display shifted to show what he had found, and every person on the bridge drew in a sharp breath. It was a ship. But calling it a ship felt wrong somehow. The thing was 3 miles long and covered in black armor that seemed to absorb all light. Massive harvesting arms extended from its hull like the legs of some nightmare spider, and its surface was covered with processing vents that glowed an ugly red. This was a harvester dreadnought, the mobile factory that turned entire worlds into raw materials. Vasquez had seen intelligence reports about these vessels, but the pictures had not captured the true horror of seeing one in person. They are hailing us, Park reported. Her voice small and scared. Vasquez straightened her uniform and set her face into a mask of calm. Put them through. The main screen flickered, and then a harvester appeared before them. It was tall and thin like the guards, but larger and decorated with what looked like trophies. Pieces of crystal, chunks of metal, fragments of things that might have once been living. When it spoke, its voice was smooth and almost pleasant, like a merchant greeting a customer. Ah, another species answers the call, the harvester said, its mouth splitting into what might have been a smile. We thank you for your contribution to our great work. I am Admiral Kira Vasquez of the Human Confederacy. Vasquez replied, keeping her voice steady. You will release the Velith prisoners and withdraw from this system. Immediately, the harvester tilted its head like a confused dog. Prisoners? It repeated with something like amusement. These are not prisoners. They are resources. It gestured behind itself, and the view expanded to show more of the dreadnought's interior. Rows upon rows of Velith stood in holding cells. Their beautiful crystal bodies dimmed almost to darkness. Many were missing pieces, chunks cut away and processed into whatever materials the harvesters needed. Some of them were still alive, and their eyes held a pain that no words could describe. Your Velith produce excellent energy crystals when properly refined, the harvester continued in that horrible, pleasant voice. Their molecular structure is quite unique, and we have found many uses for it. Vasquez felt something hot and dangerous building in her chest, a fury unlike anything she had experienced before. You are going to release them, she said again, or I will take them from you. The harvester made a sound that might have been laughter. "We have studied your species. Human," it said. "You are young and small. Only 40 billion in your entire civilization." It leaned closer to the screen. "We have processed species 10 times your size. We have consumed worlds far older than your sun. You are nothing but another resource waiting to be harvested. You studied us," Vasquez acknowledged. "But you did not understand what you found." The harvester's smile faded slightly. "What is there to understand?" it asked. "You are meat and bone, no different from any other creature." Vasquez allowed herself a small smile of her own. "We are very different," she said, "because we remember what you have forgotten." "And what is that?" Vasquez stood up from her command chair and walked closer to the screen until she was face to face with the creature that had caused so much suffering. "We remember that the universe is cruel," she said. "We remember that survival requires more than kindness. We remember how to fight." She turned to Commander Hayes. "Launch all fighters, arm all weapons. Prepare boarding parties for the orbital platforms." Hayes responded instantly, his hands flying across his console all around them. The Third Fleet began to transform from a patrol group into a war machine. The harvester watched with growing confusion. "You cannot be serious," it said. "No species resists the harvest. The doctrine guarantees that you will come to us with open arms." The doctrine was written by beings who forgot what predators look like, Vasquez replied. "Humanity never forgot. We could not afford to." She gave the signal, and the first wave of missiles launched from the Iron Resolve. "We are the predators you never expected to meet." The harvester's confident expression finally cracked, replaced by something that looked almost like fear. "What are you?" it demanded. Vasquez watched as human fighters swarmed toward the orbital platforms, their weapons hot and their pilots ready for battle. She watched as her destroyers moved into attack formation around the dreadnought. She watched as the first explosions lit up the darkness of space. "We are humanity," she answered, "and we did not come here to negotiate." The screen went dead as the harvester cut the connection, and Vasquez turned to face her crew. Every face was hard. Every eye was focused. Every hand was ready. These were her people, sons and daughters of a world that had known nothing but struggle for its entire history. They had climbed from the mud through blood and fire, and they had carried that fire with them to the stars. "All ships," Vasquez commanded, her voice ringing through the fleet. "Attack!" The Battle of Valith Prime had begun. The Battle of Valith Prime. The galaxy had not seen true war in 12,000 years, and it had forgotten what violence looked like. When it was unleashed without mercy, the harvesters were about to be reminded. Commander Hayes watched his tactical display as the first wave of human missiles struck the enemy formation. The harvester escort ships had been designed to intimidate, to look frightening and make weaker species surrender before a fight could even begin. They had never faced an enemy that chose to fight anyway. "First salvo complete," Hayes reported. "Enemy shields holding but weakened." Admiral Vasquez nodded from her command chair. "Second wave. Focus on their engine sections." The Iron Resolve shuddered as another barrage of missiles launched from her forward tubes around her. The other battleships of the Third Fleet added their own fire, creating a storm of destruction that turned the void into a sea of light. The harvesters tried to respond, their own weapons firing in wild patterns, but their gunners had never practiced against enemies who shot back, and their aim was poor. Human destroyers danced between their attacks, moving with a grace that came from centuries of combat training. Captain Maria Santos commanded the destroyer Swift Justice, and she guided her ship through the chaos with expert skill. "Hard to starboard," she ordered, and her helmsman spun the wheel without hesitation. A harvester beam weapon cut through the space where they had been a moment before, missing them by inches. "Return fire. Target their weapon mounts." The Swift Justice's guns roared in response, punching holes through the Harvester vessel's poorly armored hull. The enemy ship began to spin wildly as its systems failed one by one. "That is one down," Santis said with grim satisfaction. 23 more to go. Across the battlefield, the human carrier groups launched their fighter wings. These small ships were piloted by men and women who had trained their entire lives for this moment. Volunteers who knew they might not come home but flew anyway. Squadron leader James Okonkwo led the Red Wolves. 12 fighters moving in perfect formation toward the orbital platforms where the Velith slaves were held. "Stay tight," Okonkwo called to his pilots. "Our mission is to protect the boarding shuttles. Let the big ships handle the dreadnought behind them." Heavy shuttles filled with Marines approached the platforms. These soldiers carried weapons and wore armor, and their faces held the hard determination of people who had come to set others free. Sergeant First Class Rosa Chun, no relation to the ambassador, was the first to breach the platform's outer hull. She blew a hole through the metal with a shaped charge and led her squad inside, her rifle sweeping for targets. The Harvester guards were waiting, their strange weapons raised. "Contact!" Chun shouted, and the corridor erupted into violence. Human rifles cracked like thunder, each shot precise and deadly. The guards had never fought opponents who could shoot back, and their confusion cost them dearly. One by one they fell, gray blood pooling on the floor. "Push forward," Chun ordered. "The prisoners are 2 levels down." Her squad moved like a single creature, covering angles and checking corners with the fluid efficiency of professional soldiers. They had trained for this in simulators, practiced clearing ships and stations until they could do it in their sleep. Now the training was paying off. Meanwhile, the Harvester dreadnought had finally begun to fight back. The massive ship turned toward the human fleet, its harvesting arms extending like claws. Admiral Vasquez watched it come without fear. "All battleships, focus fire on the dreadnought," she commanded. "I want those arms disabled before they can grab any of our ships." The Iron Resolve led the charge, her main guns blazing as she closed the distance. The dreadnought's armor was thick, designed to withstand asteroid impacts and resist the desperate attacks of dying worlds, but it had never faced 12 human battleships firing in coordinated salvos. The first arm came apart under the concentrated fire, its massive frame shattering into 1,000 pieces. The second arm followed moments later, and then the third. The dreadnought screamed, a sound that somehow traveled through the vacuum of space and into the minds of everyone nearby. It was a sound of rage and confusion and something that might have been pain. They are trying to retreat. Hayes reported, "The dreadnought is powering its hyperspace drive." "Not today," Vasquez replied. "All ships, target their engines." The full weight of the Third Fleet turned toward the dreadnought's rear section for one terrible moment. The enemy ship glowed with the energy of an attempted jump. Then human missiles found their mark, and the engines exploded in a flash of white light. The dreadnought went dark, its massive form drifting helplessly through space. "All enemy ships destroyed or disabled," Hayes announced, his voice filled with something like wonder. The battle is over, but for Sergeant Chen and her Marines, the fight was not finished. They had reached the prison level of the orbital platform, and what they found there would haunt them forever. Thousands of Velith stood in tiny cells, their crystal bodies broken, and many had pieces missing, cut away by harvester tools. Some could barely stand, held upright only by the walls of their cages. "Open the cells," Chan ordered, a voice cracking despite her efforts to stay professional. Her soldiers moved down the rows, breaking locks and helping the prisoners walk. One Velith, larger than the others and covered in cracks that glowed with faint inner light, reached out and touched Chen's face with a crystalline hand. "You came," it whispered in a voice like wind chimes. You heard our warning and you came." Chung felt tears running down her cheeks, but did not try to stop them. "Of course we came," she said. "That is what humans do." The Veilith made a sound that might have been a laugh or a sob. "We forgot that kindness could have claws," it said. "We forgot that protectors exist above them." The battle was over. The Harvester fleet was destroyed. Their dreadnought, a floating tomb human ships, moved through the wreckage. Searching for survivors and securing the captured platforms, Admiral Vasquez stood on her bridge and watched the ruined world below. So much had been lost. So much that could never be recovered, but the Veilith still lived. "And they were finally free. Send a message to Earth," she said quietly. "Tell them it is done. The darkness of Veilith Prime was finally broken. Not by peace, but by those willing to make war in its name." The new doctrine 3 weeks after the Battle of Veilith Prime. The Galactic Assembly gathered once more in its great hall, but this time there was no anger in the air. This time there was only silence and shame. Ambassador David Chun walked to the central platform with slow and heavy steps. He was tired. More tired than he had ever been in his life. The past weeks had been filled with difficult conversations and harder truths. Behind him came a group of beings that no one in the Assembly had ever seen before. Veilith survivors. Led by their new speaker, the Veilith had not attended an assembly meeting in over 600 years. They had believed themselves safe in their distant corner of the galaxy, protected by the Concord's promise of peace. That belief had nearly destroyed them. The speaker was called Crystallis, and she was the oldest Veilith still alive after the harvest. Her body was covered in cracks that would never heal, and pieces of her left arm were missing entirely, but her eyes shone with a light that had not been there during her captivity. "The light of freedom. We thank the Assembly for allowing us to speak," Crystallis began, her voice carrying through the massive chamber like music. "We come before you not to accuse, but to share what we have learned." The delegates leaned forward in their seats, eager to hear from the species they had failed to protect 600 years ago. "Our people chose to forget the old ways," Crystallis continued. "We believed that violence was a disease that could be cured through evolution, and so we changed our very bodies to make aggression impossible." She paused, her crystalline form catching the light. "We thought we were wise, but we were only lucky." Ambassador Tethys of the Morvani shifted uncomfortably in her seat. She had been one of the loudest voices against the human fleet, and now she could barely look at the damaged Veilith before her. "When the harvesters came, we had no words for what they were doing to us," Crystallis said. "Our language had no terms for murder or slavery or cruelty." Her voice grew quieter. "We could not even ask for help properly, because we did not know how to say that we were being hunted." She turned to face Chun, but the humans understood. Chun looked down at his feet, uncomfortable with the praise. "We just listened more carefully than the others," he said. "Anyone could have done it." "No," Crystallis replied firmly. "They could not." She turned back to the Assembly. The Concord created a galaxy where kindness was the only law. And for 12,000 years that was enough. Her damaged arm rose to point at the gathered delegates. "But kindness without strength is just an invitation to predators." The words hung in the air. Heavy and true. No one spoke against them, because no one could. "The humans are different from us," Crystallis continued. "They came from a world that did not forgive weakness. A world where survival meant fighting every day." She moved closer to Chun, her crystal hand resting on his shoulder. "Some of you see their history as a mark of shame, a sign that they are lesser beings who have not evolved beyond violence." Her eyes swept across the silent assembly. "You are wrong." The delegates shifted and murmured, but still no one spoke. "The humans carry the memory of their struggles like a shield," Crystallis said. "They know that the universe is not always kind, and they prepared themselves for the darkness that others chose to forget." She stepped forward until she stood at the very edge of the platform. When the harvesters sent their false call for help, the Concorde heard a peaceful message from a world in need. Her voice rose with emotion. The humans heard a trap, because they remember what traps sound like. Admiral Vasquez was watching the proceedings from the orbital station above Valith Prime. Her eyes fixed on the display screen. She had been offered a seat in the assembly chamber, but she had declined. Her place was with her fleet, with the soldiers who had fought and bled to free a world they had never seen before. Lieutenant Park stood beside her, also watching. "They are going to change the doctrine," Park said quietly. "The first change in 12,000 years, Vasquez nodded slowly. It was time. Below on the screen, Ambassador Chun was finally speaking. "Humanity does not want to rule the galaxy," he said, his tired voice carrying to every corner of the Great Hall. "We do not want to impose our ways on species who have found their own path to peace." He looked at Crystallis, then at Tethys, then at all the other delegates who had once called his people savages. "But we will not stand by while innocents suffer." He straightened his shoulders and spoke with more strength. "We know what predators look like. We know how they hunt and how they think. And we know how to stop them." His hand reached into his pocket and pulled out a small document. "This is a proposal for a new addition to the doctrine of peaceful first contact." He held it up for all to see. "It states that in cases of suspected hostile occupation, the Human Confederacy reserves the right to answer distress calls with military force." The chamber erupted into conversation, but it was not the angry shouting of 3 weeks ago. This was the sound of beings wrestling with a new idea, struggling to accept a truth they had denied for too long. Tethys rose slowly from her seat. "The Morvani Collective supports this proposal," she said, her voice heavy with regret. "We were wrong to reject the warnings of our human friends, and we will not make that mistake again." One by one, the other delegates stood to add their voices. The Relics, the Shuvan, the beings of water and light and crystal, all of them voted yes. When the count was finished, the proposal had passed unanimously. The first change to the doctrine in 12,000 years on the station above. Vasquez allowed herself a small smile. "We did it," Park whispered. "We actually changed the galaxy." Vasquez shook her head. "No," she said. "We reminded the galaxy of something it forgot." She looked out the window at the stars, at the vast and dangerous universe that stretched beyond sight. "We reminded them that sometimes peace requires someone willing to make war." The Third Fleet would remain at Valith Prime for another 3 months, helping to rebuild what could be rebuilt and protecting the survivors as they healed. But Admiral Vasquez knew that this was only the beginning. The harvesters had other fleets, other dreadnoughts, and they would not take this defeat quietly. War was coming, a war that the Concorde had never imagined possible. But this time, they would not face it alone. Humanity had answered the call, not with open hands and gentle words, but with fire and steel and the unbreakable will to protect those who could not protect themselves. They were not conquerors, they were not monsters, they were guardians, and the galaxy would never forget it.